about as a project from a long time ago, but it's one nearby here, and probably the first time, ironically, it's the first time that the Irish state, as far as I'm aware, spent money on a vernacular, a traditional building, because it was a traditional building and not because it was associated with Roy Pierce or some historical figure. And this was in 1998, which was incredibly late into our history that such a thing happened, because the history of interest in traditional buildings in Ireland really is connected to folklore and to the history of social movements more than of our cultural heritage. The Mayglass farm is a few miles kind of southeast of here, but you can see where we are here in this. The two little baronies in south of Wexford, Forth and Bargy, which is this area here, and Mayglass is there, kind of halfway between Wexford and Kilmore Quay. It's a really interesting place. Now, I have to say, I'm not from Wexford. I had never been there till I came down to look at this building prior to kind of putting a pitch for getting this job. Which sounds really, really mechanistic and exploitative. But when I came to the place, I just was really flabbergasted. Like, this is a village nearby, Tom Haggard, and this is a little penal chapel within sight of the established Church of Ireland building that occupied the rightful place of the village. And this building was maintained right to the present time. Even though there's a Catholic church from the 1820s nearby as well. There's a pride in the identity of the area that isn't everywhere in Ireland. And you can't help but notice these large thatched houses, like nobody would call that a cottage. It's a good sized farmhouse. And it's not alone. There's a whole series of these in the south part of Wexford, and to go with all the other mud and thatched buildings all over the county. And this building here is the Tecumseh Windmill. Now, it is a stone building, lime rendered, thatched, and it's in private ownership, but back in the 1940s it was, through local efforts, was taken into state care, state guardianship, which again I think is fairly unique in Ireland. Like, it's 30, 40, 50 years before similar projects in the rest of the country. So what I'm saying is that Wexford is a different place. I think is a different place. Has something different in the water here. And Mayglass, this was the house that I saw in 1998. It had been lived until the mid-90s by its last occupant, Seamus Kerwin, and he had been a contact for the folklore department and for people interested in local history in Wexford. I think he had actually been here. There are pictures of him actually working here in its early days, showing people how they do straw rope or thatching or stuff like that. So he was known, and his house was known, and as he got older, people were wondering what to do with it. And there was enough people of interest. I think Barry, if he's still here, and people from Dublin, from the folklore department, UCD, and people from Wexford local history interests wondered what to do with it, and put it to the Heritage Council that they would take it on and see what could happen. And the owners, after Seamus Kerwin died, the owners who lived across the road, who inherited it, came to agreement with the Heritage Council that there would be a 10-year project. And it's a 10-year project. It wasn't forever. It was a kind of a license to work on the building, restore the building, but also its contents, because this is only part of it. This is the back of it at that time, 1998. Sheltered side, so the thatch isn't as decayed. The outbuildings across the street from it are more decayed, and the roof has fallen in. This was actually taken down here by the Casey's because they felt it was ready to fall. You can see the cobbling in front of it it's a few miles from the sea. They're shaped by their beach stones. And you can get this little porch that you see in the Wexford houses you saw on Barry's plans. This little thing sticks out and the door goes in, and you can go round to the right or into the main room. You can see the gable is earth, not stone, and the little half hip to reduce the height of the gable, so it isn't as high as a full gable. And you saw that picture before. Salvaged ship's timber, probably washed up on the beach, used to form the canopy over the chimney, air-dried brick. It had started to fail and it had been propped. Then behind that is this. The house was extended maybe 100 years after it was first built. Because this part of the house is the original part of the house on the left-hand side, and you can see it's got no ceiling. It's got big high floor to top of the wall, and it's the way that the thatch is tied on is with onto kind of woven structure. This here was built into the house, into the wall, probably from day one.
Excuse me.
Pardon?
Did you take that picture?
I took some of these. And Mary Hannah from the Heritage Council took some of them, and we compiled them together.
So that's from the late 90s?
That's from 1998. And there was a man living there till at least 1995-ish. That's the way the thatch is in that part of the house. You'll see the woven hazel structure in between a mix of there's newer timbers, older timbers, and it's smoke blackened. So it's smoke blackened thatch, so that the thinking is this dates from sometime after just maybe 1700, and that the canopy was put in afterwards, which is why this is smoke blackened. It was blackened at an earlier stage before the chimney canopy went in. So the house is really interesting. It's really old. It's really interesting. You can see I've come up the stairs now, and I'm in the newer part of the house, up that stairs into a 2-story part of the house, and I'm looking down into the room. You can see like pieces of timber and furniture. I don't know where to start on it, but everything was catalogued. But you see upstairs, you see this is an extension, and you can see it's sawn timber. It's and a kind of what looks like a sash window. It's not really a sash window. It doesn't slide, but it looks like a sash window. So they reckon it's kind of 1820s, probably around 1820s. You see the kind of windows. So that was the house and its contents, and the Heritage Council said, what are we going to do with this? So they put together a steering group to think about what we're going to do with the place and how we're going to organise themselves. So the steering group had representatives from the Heritage Council, from Dúchas as it was, which is now the department in Dublin, the National Museum Folk Life section, the Department of Folklore, Barbara Flynn, Loughlin Keeley School of Architecture, and they came together, got a brief, and got expressions of interest, including from me and from an engineer, Dermot Nolan, and from various other people, and they interviewed us, and they came to two of us and said, we don't want to employ one of you, we'd employ two of you together as a team. And I think that's when I really thought, like, this project is going to be interesting. It's there's something different happening here that I don't understand, but it's definitely, it's scary, but it's definitely going to be interesting. And the other person on it, I think really good practice, was Chris Sumner from the Wheeldon Downland Museum as an external advisor, to make sure that we were fully aware of what we were doing and of good practice generally, and really important, influential man on that steering committee. So the first thing we had to do when we were appointed is protect the building, because it wasn't going to survive another couple of winters. Once those thatched roofs get wet and heavy, the thing they do is they fall in. So we had to avoid that happening at all costs, because that would end the project. So with the first thing we did, we decided was we will use agricultural technology. This shed, we got quotes from a number of agricultural shed providers to make us a shed like this that could fit over the building, that sits on top of huge big concrete weights, that's not to hold that up, it's to stop it blowing away, that sit above ground, so do not disturb the ground. And it's bolted together, and it was, after the house was finished, it could be taken down and reused for something else. It actually was reused for agricultural purposes just behind the house. But it kind of started, we said, right, this is how we're going to do it. And that kind of influenced how we approached everything on the house. That we worked as far as we could with the way that we found things. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But across the way, with the outbuildings, we didn't use a shed, we used plastic. Would never use that again. Wexford is known as the sunny southeast, but actually it's the windiest part of Ireland. More days of wind than the other part of Ireland. And when you look at that map of Ireland where we are, facing near the Atlantic, you can see why. This gave us endless heartache. The only high-tech element of this whole project was this, and I don't have good photographs of this because it was a wild March weekend. And Chris Zoyner, with his connections to Germany, knew about a way of treating the objects and the construction elements, timber elements of the house that could kill woodworm. So we did we kind of specified 3 ways that the woodworm that was in the house and in the contents in the house could be dealt with. The large items could be taken away and brought to freezers in that museum, the way the museum do it, and they could be left for a certain length of time, temperature lowered to a certain level. It denatures protein, and it will stop the eggs that are there hatching and coming through again, so you won't get further damage to timber objects. The problem in this house is there's so much timber built into the structure, including the roof, all the roof elements, so we had to do something else with that, and one of the ways was you spray it. You spray it, and we got somebody to quote who do food installations, big modern, that they would get 24-hour security. They would seal the house up and they would pump in toxic gas, hold it there for something like 24 hours. Nobody could be near it, it's so toxic. And they told us, like, but it's not illegal. We said, you can't be doing this. So this other way is a way of dealing with it. It's basically to heat up the building, heat up the objects to over 55 degrees. It has the same effect as freezing. It denatures the protein of the eggs, things that are left in the timber, and it doesn't leave them viable for life again. So the problem with heating up timber is that it cracks if you don't control the humidity. But it was with there's a laptop here, and there's a machine there that's putting in moisture into the air, and the air is pumped in through these things into the house. Normally they wrap the house, they developed this for timber Baroque altarpieces in German churches in the south of Germany, where they couldn't move them, they're too big, and they would wrap them in a kind of tin foil stuff and pump in the air where they hold the humidity constant, and then build up the heat slowly and bring it down slowly. Here, they tried the tinfoil. It was a wild March of 1999. It wasn't going to work. So what happened instead was they discovered by doing a little test in one of the rooms, just that they, blocked up the window and pumped in the thing, that actually whatever they're saying about U values of mud walls, they discovered that the thatch and the mud meant they had no problem getting the sensors to reach the temperatures they needed, and it worked. Building is still standing, and even 20 years on, it did work. They were there for a weekend. They slept in a camper van and took all the way stuff in a truck, and came on the ferry and went away in the ferry 3 days later. And that was the only high-tech thing that we did, and that was because we couldn't think of any other way to do it. There was nothing local to deal with that. The other thing that I know Paddy Byrne over there knows all about, because he worked on these things. We also had to face the building because of the mud walls allow for gradual movement of timber through them. So when you put a thatched roof on a mud wall building, you have your rafters coming down. They're pushing into the mud. As the thatch ages and as it gets wet and as it gets new layers added on top, it gets heavier. And our thatchers said the first thing they do when they get to a mud wall house in Wexford is they look at the roof structure and reinforce it quite often. Every few thatchings they have to reinforce it, because what you get is the mud is pushing out, and as the mud pushes out, it can crack. And we had different kinds of faults around it. We had the zone here between the stone and the mud. The stone is hard, the mud decays, so you get wearing away. You get, like I said, the cracking. You get. So we had to find a way to reinstate the mud, and the way that that we would think of doing it, which is just clear out where the decay is and put mud in. It doesn't work, because if you put wet mud against dry mud, it just separates. The new mud dries away. It falls out. So. Also, we had never done this. We were terrified of this stuff. So we read books, we talked to people from Dorset and Devon and places, and finally Dermot, the engineer, and myself, we went to York to a one-day seminar, and there was a lot of learned people there who spoke about lots of different aspects of mud. But one of the people had bits of mud on the table, and he stood up in front of us and he rolled it in his hand, and he said, the basic secret of working it, you can disagree, but this is what he said to us, and it really made us feel comfortable with dealing with it. He said, if you can roll it and it gets much longer than that, it's got too much clay, and you need to get more sand into it. And if you roll it and it just won't hold together at all, you need to get more clay in. Mm-hmm. And it's just simple mix, so that makes it workable. And they told us as well. The other thing they said was, we made bricks. We made two sizes of bricks, small ones and big ones. And the reason for doing this was that where we have to make up broken away areas of mud that had decayed, because that this allowed us to make a piece of mud, let it dry, and then we can set it into the wall. So he's stitching across a crack. This isn't structural. The structure has been dealt with separately, but this is stitching in across a crack using our bricks that allow us to decorate over, plaster over. Or here, there's an area there at the top of the cement that has been bricked and then plastered over, and that's redecorated on the corners where the repairs have been. Redecorated onwards. The outbuildings, I'll just quickly kind of show you. We had to rebuild the whole back of it. We took the structure of the roofs down and reinstated them in new kind of bits of trees, and the thatched roof on it is a new thatched roof. It's in wheat because we didn't have enough of this one left. This one's in oat on wheat, which is more traditional, as you'd see in Wexford, where. But this anyway, you'll see it when you go there, like the difference between the longevity of this and this. This is new wheat, and it's wheat grown by a farmer who reckoned there was a double market. If he could grow traditional crops suitable for thatching, he would sell organic grain, and then he would also have a straw. Dominic Rice up in Ashburn. So we had terrible problems getting oat straw for the main house. We got a local thatcher, Jim Burke, who was going to do the work, and he agreed to do the work after the early potatoes were in, because that's what he did for a living, get potatoes in. And he agreed to do the work, but we had to get the straw, and we couldn't get the straw. His straw man had retired on the farm retirement scheme, and he couldn't grow even an acre of oats under the terms of his farm retirement. We put an ad in the Irish Farmers Journal. I literally travelled the country, in Munster and Leinster, visiting people who said they had enough straw, and found it really hard. We finally got straw from 2 or 3 different places, calling in the thatched in favours from all over the place, getting oat straw suitable for thatching. And we got straw. Most straw came from 3 brothers who had this stuff, but we had to collect it. We had to do all the work with it to make it suitable for Jim, the thatcher, and it really was funny. It was. I was driving people down to a shed in the countryside where in the daytime they were pulling the straw to make it into the length suitable to put together. It was an interesting experience of that. So this is kind of just nearly finishing, and then this, you can see the structure upstairs is doubled up. You can see the floor here is a timber boarded floor, and we saw that the old floor here had been repaired with small little insets into the weir, into the thing, but it had been done when the building was built, and was right into the back of the building where it would have taken least wear. We reckon these timber boards are salvaged from grain stores, because grain stores because of the grain and the shovelling on them, take a heavy wear, and we reckon this is second-hand timber. And it was put in here, and in the the worst of the timber is put into the back bedroom, and then they do lovely little repair work. What we did was leave it, but we put in a floor on top of it that you can just lift out. Literally, it's not even fixed. You can, and that was the way we kind of worked with the building. The structural repair is really simple. It's just actually this was an original doubled up. You can see the way they doubled up the roof, and we put in a new one beside it. We literally did exactly what they did, using timber matching. It's a little bit heavier because the engineer was a bit nervous about the size of the original timbers, but that timber that's in that thing, it's roughly it's 5 by 2. It's cut from 9 inches because of the shape of the roof, that the roof had literally gone out like that. So the carpenter who did all the work, he was an ordinary carpenter from Cleary and Doyle Builders, but he had an attitude that said, like, you know, we'll see what we can do. He kind of took a profile of the roof, put it down on the timber, cut it out, and put on the boards. And likewise here, this is a piece of gunmetal. Inside there's a timber structure that supports that. There's a steel galvanised plate on the back of that, and all of that stuff is done in Bridgetown, about 2 or 3 miles away. Again, working with technology that was just there in the area, that the builders were familiar with, and that's reversible, that kind of fits all the charters. And this is it in 2000. This was taken away, and everybody's was wondering what would happen, but nothing. It was taken away and everything held. So that's the last thing is that through this process of that kind of way of working with the people, we went looking at an object, and we looked at the problems of an object, and we thought that there are solutions and they need skills, and where do we get the skills? And then we found people. And with people, we went for scale, we found people had skills, or sometimes they had different skills, sometimes they had a different way of thinking or looking or working. And like what we found was that, like, if you went with the skills that you had and saw what you could do with that, you actually can't, there's more than one way to do anything. And that way of working meant that, like, we started getting a whole pile of people opening up and talking to us, people leaning over the hedge and telling us that they could, you know, what we could do and all that. Like, and then gradually we started getting people telling us how it used to be done, how they thought it should be done, where you could get better earth to mix in with our stuff, where you could get fellow who make scallops for you. Just a whole world started opening up that I find it hard to explain, that there's an ecology here, that these buildings are not objects. These buildings are, in some ways, that they are objects created by community and lived in and worked in over time to serve a communal life, a way of living and a way of working, and that the object in the end is not what's important. What's important in the end is the community, the life, the way of doing things, the skills, abilities, perspectives that are in the community, and that the house and its objects are important insofar as they give evidence of that, so that what's important here is not the object, it's the life that the object is only a witness for. And you would think then, okay, so the object's not important, that is a strange thing, but when you start to realise the kind of connections and the kind of life that's still in a community like in South Wexford, that you come and look at the house again, and this time not as an isolated individual object, but as one of the interconnected kind of like body stock of building that you're going to see tomorrow, that's grown up in South Wexford over 800 years, and like that makes it, in my eyes, so much more interesting and so much more beautiful than that individual object I came to see the first day that I came here in 1998. There is a website, and there is a website because, and it's called that because it was the Millennium and it was funded by a European programme where we describe the project, the aims of it and what we hope to get out of it and how we're going to do it, who our partners were in Europe, including Portugal, from the training group for the construction industry, the Wheels of Downey Museum, proud in Denmark, and the Heritage Council, obviously, Council of Europe. And we had workshops aimed at local builders, aimed at local owners and occupiers of these buildings, both to get their impressions of what we were doing and also to maybe pass back kind of results of what we were trying to do. We visited Portugal, saw things they're doing in the Alentejo, that you saw referred to earlier, and we had a launch of the building once the project was finished, and published a book, which you can buy from the Heritage Council on the project. Pardon?
Which is in everybody's goodie bag.
Okay, all right. Didn't even open it yet. So that's May Glass. You're going to see it tomorrow. But do remember, that was a 10-year project. I don't know what it's like now, but I think it probably needs another round of thought and thinking about where do you go now with it, what happens next. So.